We've developed the supply side of the economy, we've developed the demand side of the economy, and now we're ready to put the two sides together to find out what equilibrium looks like in the macroeconomy. Our study of equilibrium is going to proceed in three parts. In this part, we're going to look at the short run. What determines the aggregate price level and the output of the economy in the short run, when there's confusion about prices, when wages are fixed, and when prices are sticky. Next, we're going to talk about the adjustment process. What happens when the economy tries to produce more than the full employment level of output? What does that do to prices, and how do we show that in our model? That's the adjustment process. And finally, we're going to look at long-run macroeconomic equilibrium. What does the economy look like when all the adjustment is finished, all the dust has settled, and we wind up with a new price level and output? So let's begin with the short run. To examine short-run macroeconomic equilibrium, we'll need our aggregate demand curve and the short-run aggregate supply curve. So let's draw those. First, the downward sloping aggregate demand curve represents the inverse relationship between the aggregate price level and real gross domestic product. When the price level rises because of the wealth effect, because of the effect on foreigners, and because of the effect on the money supply through interest rates on investment spending, we get a lower level of real gross domestic product whenever the price level rises. So we've talked other places about why the aggregate demand curve slopes downwards. The short-run aggregate supply curve we've been drawing as an upward sloping line, representing the fact that when the price level rises in the economy, in the short run, we get an increase in real gross domestic product because firms respond to a higher aggregate price level by increasing their output. They perceive profit opportunities and therefore they produce more. They perceive profit opportunities because, first of all, wages are sticky in the short run. So when the price level rises, firms find that they're able to sell their products for more revenue, and yet the fixed wages keep their costs controlled. The profit opportunity leads them to produce more. Next, we have sticky prices. That is, some firms find it costly to change their prices in the short run, so they lag behind. And as the general price level rises, their products become a bargain. Customers run in to buy them while the prices are still low, and those firms then find it profitable to produce more. And finally, there's confusion in the short run. When the general price level rises and prices are going up and you're able to charge more for your product, as a business, you're not sure in the short run whether that's just an increase in demand for your product or whether it's general economy-wide inflation. And you respond to a perceived profit opportunity by producing more output in the short run. So let's look then, when we put these two curves together, at the point where they cross, because this is short-run macroeconomic equilibrium. The point where they cross is a price level, and let's call this P sub 0, and a level of real gross domestic product, let's call this Y sub 0, where the economy is in equilibrium. If the price level were below P sub 0, then look what would happen. If we were at a lower price level, then there would be a large aggregate demand. The lower prices would lead to a decreased demand for money, which would lead to lower interest rates, which would cause businesses to want to spend more. Also, with lower price levels, the real value or the purchasing power of wealth is higher, so consumers would spend more. Also, if our price level is lower, foreigners are going to buy our goods instead of goods from other countries. Also, with a lower price level, businesses are going to cut back their production because they perceive that they are losing profit opportunity. With the price level lower, when wages are fixed in the short run, businesses want to cut back because it's not profitable to produce. Also, with prices being sticky, some companies aren't going to be able to lower their prices fast enough, and they're going to lose customers, so they cut back their output. And finally, the third thing is expectations. The price level is falling, but you're not sure in the short run whether this is all over the economy or whether it's just you. People may not want your products, so you hedge your bets by cutting back your output. Well, look what happens. The lower price level in the short run gives us a small supply and a large demand. We have excess aggregate demand in the short run, and that would then tend to bid prices back up. We get exactly the opposite problem if the price level is above this equilibrium. If it is, then businesses are really gung-ho to produce because they've got lots of profit opportunity, they think, and therefore they increase production. Wages are set, prices are higher, and so on. Also, with a higher price level, demand is shrinking because the demand for money is going up, and with it interest rates, so business spending is falling, consumers aren't buying as much because their real wealth is shrinking, and foreigners are looking for bargains in other countries. That then creates a situation in which we have excess aggregate supply, and that will, with goods piling up on the shelves, lead businesses to lower their prices until we return to equilibrium. So this is what equilibrium looks like in the short run. It's a price level and a gross domestic product at which the quantity that people are willing and able to buy in the economy is equal to what businesses are producing. Now, let's do a few comparative statics exercises, shifting the curves to see how equilibrium changes. Let's begin with an increase in government spending. An increase in government spending is shown by an outward shift in the aggregate demand curve. If the aggregate demand curve shifts outwards, because the government now is spending more at any given price level, this means that the economy has to produce more at any given price level to give us an equilibrium. If this is the case, then at the original price level, we're going to have excess aggregate demand. So if I follow this dotted line over, this is the new aggregate demand with the government spending more, and it's way more than what businesses are producing, which we find by following the price level to where it touches the blue line. With the government and everybody else wanting to buy a lot, and businesses producing not enough, we have excess aggregate demand, and the price level begins to rise. As the price level rises, consumers, businesses, and foreigners buy less. And as the price level rises, with sticky wages, sticky prices, and confusion, businesses produce more until we reach our new short-run macroeconomic equilibrium. That's going to be shown in our graph as an output level of Y1 and a price level of P1. So the excess aggregate demand is resolved by rising prices, which reduce planned spending and increase planned production until we get to the new short-run macroeconomic equilibrium point. Let's consider another alternative. Suppose now we start with a situation in which aggregate demand and aggregate supply are crossing, and we've got macroeconomic equilibrium in the short run. And now let's consider a case where taxes are increased. If taxes are increased relative to this original macroeconomic equilibrium with a price level of P0 and an output level of Y0, we're going to have an aggregate demand curve shifting inward. Higher taxes reduce consumers' disposable income and cause consumers to spend less at every price level. This means that at the original price level, total planned spending is less than it was before. And since this price level gives us, on the blue curve, this quantity of planned output, we now have excess aggregate supply. People are buying less than factories are making. That puts downward pressure on prices. And as the price level falls, consumers' real wealth increases, the demand for money decreases, and with it the interest rate, so that business spending increases, and foreigners buy more as well. However, as the price level falls, businesses sense that they don't have such good profit opportunities. Remember, wages are sticky. Some prices are sticky, and there's confusion. So the falling prices lead businesses to produce less output than before. The new equilibrium then occurs at a lower level of real gross domestic product and a lower price level. So what happens when the aggregate demand curve shifts inward is the price level falls and output falls in the short run. This is the new point of short-run macroeconomic equilibrium. Well, I've shifted the aggregate demand curve twice. I should shift the aggregate supply curve at least once for good measure. Remember, what shifts the aggregate supply curve is a change in expectations about prices. Once people believe that inflation is occurring in the economy, everyone wants to raise their prices so that they don't get left behind. Well, here's how this is going to look. We start with a situation where we've got aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply, and we have macroeconomic equilibrium in the short run occurring where the two curves cross. So here's P0, the original price level, and our original gross domestic product, Y0. Let's suppose now that a war occurs in the Middle East and that oil prices are pushed up very quickly. Well, all the firms in our economy are now facing higher input prices, increasing their costs. So they're going to immediately pass those on to their customers in the form of higher prices. Otherwise, they'd have to drop out of business. So with a supply shock and higher oil prices, or higher input prices of any kind, what we have then is an upward shift in the short-run aggregate supply curve from SRAS 0 to SRAS 1. Now, to produce any given level of output, businesses are going to charge a higher price. Well, look what this does. At the original price level P0, we still have the same aggregate demand, but now aggregate supply is less because of the increase in the cost of doing business. We now have excess aggregate demand for goods and services, and that then is going to cause price levels to rise. As price levels rise, we have the usual effects. Real wealth shrinks, the demand for money increases, and with it, higher prices lead to reduced demand for spending on the part of consumers, businesses, and foreigners. By the same token, whenever prices rise, businesses find that their profit opportunities are improving because wages are sticky, some prices are sticky, and there's confusion. Therefore, the rising prices lead businesses to produce more goods and services. Now, the net result is going to be that the supply shock winds up reducing real gross domestic product. Prices go up. However, with the rising prices, we get a reduction in real gross domestic product through the usual channels. This is short-run macroeconomic equilibrium. The aggregate demand curve intersecting the blue curve, the short-run aggregate supply curve. This, however, leaves us with a question. What if our output level is not at full employment? We've talked before about full employment output, the level of output that the economy can produce without causing inflation or deflation. We're now going to consider the relationship between the short-run equilibrium output level and full employment, and that's going to set up an adjustment dynamic. What happens to prices as they begin to move towards a long-run equilibrium level?